Hi, welcome. I'm Simon, and it's my pleasure today to talk you through kind of what we've been doing and kind of what I've been doing, I guess, for quite a long period of time. So just thank you all so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I hope this is going to be a session where we can share our learnings and again discuss and kind of have that dialogue through the various different activities we'll be doing today. So without further ado, let's get on to what we're going to be talking about. So one of the aims of the sessions today is to provide a learning opportunity to those present to understand what adolescent focused low intensity life story work is, and also kind of why it matters to young people, but also the carers who support them as well, and children's social care more broadly. We're then going to sort of show you what we think good everyday life story work practice looks like. And again, this is going to be based on our kind of series of our research program, our limitless research program, which we'll come on to explain shortly. We're then going to introduce you to our resource, which is called Spark. And this is a set of newly developed resources that were co-designed with children and young people with care experience and also their carers and social professionals more broadly. And then crucially for us, I think how we can, these activities we believe in resources can support the work that carers are trying to do with teens living in care. But also, I think for us as well, making sure we can take that next step to see how the resources can begin to be tested more rigorously in practice. So that's the kind of the overview for today. Now, before we get started and kind of you hear a lot of myself, Ella, and Paige chatting, what I'm really keen to hear from people is what one to two words spring to mind when you hear the phrase life story work. So there's a activity on the screen now. So if you'd like to kind of submit your answers, please, that'd be fantastic. So yeah, what one to two words spring to mind when you hear the phrase life story work? So it should be a word cloud activity. So you put one or two words in there, and very shortly we will have a lovely word cloud. Okay, so yeah, lots of things coming through. Identity seems to be a big one. Children's voice, kind of life experiences and history seems to be quite a large one as well. Fantastic. I think we're about sorted. Lovely. Okay, so what I'll try to do is summarize kind of what we can see in the word cloud and use that to kind of spring, I guess, to the next slide and activity. So what's kind of coming through quite clearly, if just summarize lots of these things, is very much kind of history, journey, kind of narrative, and creating lots of things. So with our work, what we've tried to do, and I think these resources are on Research and Practices web page as well, when we think about our approach to life story, we try to root it very much in that kind of adolescent life phase. And I'm using that phrase quite liberally, but I'm talking around kind of anything from 12 to sort of 18. Now, I'm aware that adolescents can start at different points depending on what different books people are into and stuff. But I think for us, we're focusing on teens and teens in a particular way with an awareness that for lots of children and young people we support and work with, of course, kind of having a history is important and looking backwards is important for lots of reasons. But also there's perhaps awareness for ourselves that might not always be what perhaps teens want to do. So we're really keen in our next activity to get you again to participate in an activity where I'd like you to just add in kind of one word that describes how teens might feel about life story work approaches, please. We're going to then try and use those two word clouds to kind of pivot and start the kind of the webinar in earnest. So if you just use the poll on the screen again, please, to write in perhaps one word that describes how teens might feel about life story work approaches, please. Okay, fantastic. I'm just going to start sort of, again, trying to summarize the 112 plus of response we've got so far. So fantastic. So yes, I think lots of, and we'll come into research in a moment, but lots of times we hear the word anxious, overwhelmed, childish. I definitely can share some of my practice reflections on the childish one. A lack of guidance, I think, is something we hear about from carers quite a lot. Resistance on there, kind of re-traumatizing, tick boxy, basic right. Yeah, these are all the things that I think we definitely kind of chime with us in our experiences, and those sort of things will be coming through in the next few slides. So I think for us, what our starting point is that kind of acknowledging first of all that life story work carries with it connotations of a trauma-focused approach, perhaps we'd perhaps call it a higher intensity approach, where it's a specific piece of work initiated primarily usually by social care services or social workers that's focused on the past and understandably has a place within children's social care. But actually, when we come to the kind of, I guess, the teens, there's an acknowledgement that it needs different ways of doing things. And again, as I mentioned before, we've done some previous webinars on this work in more detail, and there are lots of kind of theories around why and how kind of life stories should be different with teens and how it can be more or less useful. And that content is freely available, I believe, on Research and Practices web pages. So please do kind of revisit that for perhaps a more in-depth view at the different life phases, cognitive capabilities and critical thinking skills, etc., available to teens that perhaps the children when they're younger do not have. I think the big thing for me I want to pick up on was there was a lack of guidance acknowledged there, and how perhaps some of the more child-focused approaches can create barriers, along with the kind of connotations of looking back at previous traumas, which can present themselves as a barrier to trying to disengage older teens with care experience in this sort of kind of reflective conversations. And that's really where I guess our approach kind of starts. So one of the things that struck me as a residential worker back in 2005, when I had slightly more hair, slightly less wrinkles, and a lot more less experience, was when I used to work and support the children and young people I worked with, I would have to kind of go back to the residential home after a while, and I'd go back and I'd write these notes about the activities and the things we'd done, and it was very much something that was done as a professional exercise, but without really being an activity focused on preserving the kind of what I like to call the everyday moments and everyday magic that we share with our young people. So for myself, I'm aware that one day in particular it struck me was we'd played I'm going to wry smile. So we played a game of hide and seek in the dark in a quite foggy woods. Risk assessments everywhere, I know, but we'd kind of gone back to the unit, the home, and instead of spending lots of time talking about how much the young people enjoyed it and who was it and the kind of different activities and strategies they'd use to kind of get each other out and spot each other, I had to explain why perhaps one young person was later back, and I had to record the mileage of the car and all these sorts of procedural things. And I recorded the procedural over the personal, and it really struck me. I was not recording the personal, and the everyday magic, those moments of rapport we have with children and young people, were almost slipping through my fingers. And that's one of the things that always struck me about kind of the children and young people I work with. The retelling of those everyday moments were almost kind of magical, because you could see children and young people, teens I should say, kind of light up at retelling that shared experience. And there's a quote on the screen from one of the young people who's taken part in our research, which we'll talk about today. And it was a focus group exercise. We had a young person in the middle and two young people either side of this girl, Gabby, and the young lads at the side of her had been really quiet and very just reserved, again, talking to a stranger, completely understandable. And then Gabby got on to telling us about this trip to on a holiday. And as you'll see on the quote, they were walking up to a house where we were staying, and caring adult's names, this carer was like, oh, reading the sign. But as the caring adult was reading it in the sign and letting himself into the house, a seagull pooped on his head. And me and the teen said it should have been us. The next day, we got a picture of him next to a seagull sign saying, beware the seagull. So an everyday incident of a carer getting a deposit of seagull muck on their head and their shoulders was a really visible and really kind of just a memory that really struck with that young person. It was something that all the young people in the room, as I said, kind of lit up about. And for me, that was the sort of thing that when I was kind of supporting the children and young people I was supporting, we didn't really capture it. Another phrase I use is those kind of, do you remember when moments? Those moments where we go on beyond our current circumstances, and they want to retell and revisit something. And I always think about trying to put myself in their position, going, well, imagine telling a story to another person you've never met about a place and people that person will ever meet without any kind of narrative starting points, without any anecdotes or artifacts to begin to tell that story. That's a really hard cognitive task. and it's a cognitive task that I think as a social care sector we need to do better on. And that's what I mean by everyday life story work, the ability to recognize every day as a really potentially therapeutic but also critically important point in time. And therefore these everyday moments are available right now, and we're letting them fall through our fingers. The idea of working with children and young people, particularly teens, in a way which is much more about the now and about their everyday, begins to lessen anxieties. It begins to take away that nervousness, that trauma-focused element of life story work, and for me, makes it more accessible. It makes it less intense to children and young people, and it gives us the carers and the supporters of the children and young people and teens in particular, which is what we're focusing on in this project. It gives us the opportunity to record everyday moments and work hopefully with children and young people, record their everyday moments and give them the opportunity to have those, to remember when, reminiscence conversations, not only in the now, in the short term, but also in their future, in their possible futures. And I've plotted out on the screen in front of you on the slide, kind of, I guess, a mission map, if you like, for want of a better phrase. So, as I mentioned before, I worked in practice in 2005, 2006, and I was really privileged to work with a manager of a care home who herself was care experienced, and she was really keen to ensure that the children and young people we supported had the opportunity to have those do you remember when moments in the future. Now, as you'll see on the map in front of you, there's a long journey that's taken place, and there's a long journey ahead of us. But I guess what the mission of this project and the program of research we've been doing is to move what we're talking about from kind of desirable practice, and I think a lot of the things we'll talk about today to lots of carers and supporters of young people might seem a bit more like common sense. And one of the things I say when that comes across is it might be common sense, but it's not always common practice. And what we're trying to do is give a set of resources and a set of ways of doing things that are rooted in the best evidence available, having co-developed with the children and young people we're trying to support and their carers, and moving that practice from desirable to essential. Because I think from a mental health and well-being point of view, as we saw on the word cloud, children and young people with care experience need to be able to pull together coherent identities and coherent life stories. And of course, some of that will be the past, but actually the past is also now. So the moments we just passed have gone, but the everyday now can be used as a springboard to the future. So we started on this journey in earnest, I'd say probably 2019, 2020, because we'd had an idea that actually the ways in which we support teenagers needs to be different from the way in which we support younger children. Now, to do that, to really kind of break that down, we needed to look at what good life story work was. And the later project I'll talk about in a moment was, okay, well, what does that look like with teens? What does good life story look like with teens? And from that, we'll spend the rest of today's webinar talking about how that could work in different ways for different teens in different living circumstances. And as the route map begins to illustrate, we want to change the evidence base. We want to give the life story a chance, particularly the life story that we're looking at, to move from desirable to essential. That needle doesn't move unless there is evidence that supports it in terms of mental health and well-being outcomes, but also from a kind of investment point of view. If this thing's going to cost tens of thousands of pounds, we all know the state of the economy and the system at the moment. It has to be accessible. It has to be affordable. That's kind of what we're trying to do at the moment. So the next slide is going to start our journey in earnest in 2019, 2020, where we did something called a scoping review, which is just a posh academic way of saying, okay, what is the evidence here? So we know from our practice reflections that life story work should be certain things in certain ways, but actually to move the needle forward and begin to build this really firm evidence base, we had to kind of go back to what's out there. So we did a literature review of lots of thousands of documents, and we found that when we looked through it, we looked at the themes. So myself, Ella, and a colleague called Julie Young and Claire Duddy, we looked through the literature, and having searched over 1,300 documents, we whittled this down into 24 papers, 24 documents that we thought were really where we needed to be. And this might not surprise people, but I'll say it anyway. So good practice had to be young person led. A consistent support had to be available throughout, as well as access to personal information. Understandable the use of boxes and artifacts and objects were really important. and that those people supporting this work had to be trained effectively. So that's what good life story work looked like. And you'll probably imagine on the other side what things to avoid were rushed or incomplete accounts of narratives and children's histories, the use of insensitive language, and ignoring the voices from children's past. So, for example, birth family members, previous carers, and so on and so forth. So again, that was us kind of starting at the top of the funnel, if you like, and going, okay, well, what does good life story look like? So our next piece of research really picked up on the key uncertainties, what we didn't know. So we knew what good and not so good looked like for the children's sector more broadly, but we didn't know what that looked like for teens. So our next project, which was Limitless One, started to really drill down and try to provide some principles for how to undertake life story with teens. And again, we did a literature review. So again, we began to focus the funnel down. And again, after doing an international literature search, we included 75 documents in something called a realist review. Now, the name realist isn't particularly important here, but what it does really point towards is that we created a logic model or a program theory, which allowed us to really focus on what we think the 8 key principles at that particular time for doing what we're calling low intensity adolescent focused life story work. So the overarching kind of theme, if you like, from our work and our literature review, which was carried out with kind of lived experience experts, we met them at certain points when we're developing our logic model, was it has to be flexible and it has to be accessible. It has to work for 12-year-olds who's in really stable foster placement, and also for 18, 17-year-old who's perhaps in residential care and transitioning to independence, and all the various children and young people and different kind of combinations of placement and housing arrangements in between. So it had to be accessible, it had to be flexible. As I mentioned, it had to be our work has always been and always will be developed with the children, young people with experience in mind, and usually front and center of the work we do. And this particular piece of work, as I mentioned, created these 8 principles. So I will briefly read them out because I'm aware that on the screen, actually, the writing might not particularly big. So as I said, the first key thing is that you need to be personal, centered and flexible. It has to start early. So the idea of waiting for a good time didn't really work with teens. There was no bad time start. It starts in the present. So we're not looking to look at traumas in the past. We're focusing on what's going on today. It had to involve that co-construction potential with young people's participation supported and respected, because not everybody will want to get involved in this stuff, and teens may want to dip in and out of it. It had to provide somewhere to begin future storytelling. So again, linking back to that, providing artifacts and starting points, those remember when moments and stories. Record positive aspects of everyday experiences, and crucially be supported by trained carers. Now, whilst those 8 principles were, as I said, kind of grounded in the evidence at the time, what we didn't know was these key uncertainties. So again, we're looking at, okay, well, how does this work in different contexts, and what works best in different contexts for different young people? And that's really where Limitless 2 comes in. So our project will focus on more today is trying to work out how we're going to create evidence-based guidance and understandings on what works for who, how, in what circumstances, and crucially, from an evidence point of view, what are the potential therapeutic outcomes? What should we be focusing on and looking at to try and work out what we're improving? And that leads me to hand over to Ella. Thank you.
So yeah, as Simon was just saying, from the current available evidence, what we still didn't know, and we needed further information about, is whether low intensity life story work approaches could support teens, and if so, how would that work? When would it happen? Who would be involved and in what circumstances? And this is where we began with Limitless 2. So what we needed was more evidence of whether these practices are happening now, and if so, how they're happening, what circumstances and context they're happening, and why they're happening as they are. And as Simon mentioned, we also needed to understand more about what meaningful outcomes are for adolescents, carers, and social workers who are engaging in these approaches and these practices. So what are those meaningful kind of outcomes and impacts that we would be hoping to achieve through this work. So within this phase of Limitless 2, what we did was we carried out interviews and focus groups with 78 people from 8 local authorities, and we really wanted to speak to a range of people and stakeholders. So we really wanted to gain kind of a wide range of perspectives about people's experiences of this kind of everyday life story work. So we talked to 11 social workers, 32 young people, and 35 carers. And the aim was to kind of collect data and analyze that data with the aim of kind of refining our theories or our ideas of those 8 key principles of what high quality, low intensity life story work is, from our findings from Limitless 1. So as Simon also mentioned, the voices of care leavers are always and will always be at the heart of this Limitless programme of research. And in Limitless 2, we've been supported by care leaver champions from the Care Leavers National Movement, who have taken on the role as co-researchers to support us with the collection and the analysis of our data. Unfortunately, none of the co-researchers could be with us today, but Kaya has kindly recorded a video that we can share today about his experience facilitating one of the focus groups that he was involved with. I'll just play that now. Lovely. Sorry for those that couldn't hear or see the video. So Kai was just explaining about his role facilitating a focus group for us that took place in Nottingham, and where they created quite a relaxed environment, and they slowly moved into questions about everyday life story work, and that really helped the young people to feel relaxed and able to open up about their experiences, and it worked really well. So yeah, it's been really useful having our co-researchers supporting us with this part of the project, because they're able to give us a different perspective about supporting us to think about what questions that we should be asking our participants. They're really able to build a good rapport with our participants, and they also have been really helpful with the analysis stage, so they can kind of bring that different perspective to help us interpret what it is that people are telling us when they're talking to us about everyday life story work. So here we have what we developed working with our lived experience co-researchers, and these are the principles that we developed about what high quality, low intensity life story work should consist of. And what we found was that it works best when there are some core elements that are present, but it has an adaptable periphery to suit different young people's needs and contexts. So with at the core of it being that it is flexible and person-centered, with the ability to adapt to individual teenagers' needs and interests, which you can see there is at the core of the diagram. I'll just other core elements here. So low intensity life story work should start early, using everyday moments and experiences. It should emphasize present day experiences, and that helps to build trust and strengthen relationships in the teenager's life. Teens should be encouraged to choose the level of participation that they wish. So some teens may really want to be driving this process and lead it, whereas others may not want to be actively involved at all, and that's absolutely fine. Their choice of level of participation should be respected, and also they may kind of want to dip in and out, and they might want to be taking a leading role at some points, and then maybe not so much at later points, and that should be respected and is absolutely fine. But what should continue is the caring adults should continue to facilitate these approaches to prevent the loss of everyday memories for that young person. We find that both positive and challenging experiences should be recorded for the young person, and within that, teens should be supported to view the challenges that they've experienced in a way that emphasises their positive characteristics and their strengths and how they have overcome challenges, or they can overcome challenges in the future. And an essential element is also that there is ongoing training and support available to support those delivering these approaches or facilitating these approaches. So here we have kind of at the end of this phase of the research, we've developed our theories about what high quality, low intensity life story work should include. But the next challenge for us is to address those practice frustrations that Simon mentioned about actually having some actionable guidance to be able to put these approaches into practice in a consistent way. So that was the next challenge for us, to turn these findings into actionable evidence-based resources that can be used in the real world. So before we kind of move on to thinking about how we develop those resources, I just want us to kind of pause and think about whether you could see yourself or someone you support using these adolescent-focused low-intensity life story work approaches with a young person. So yeah, if you could just vote on there whether it's likely, uncertain, or unlikely that you could see yourself using these approaches. I don't know where I see the responses for it. I don't know if I've maybe clicked off the.
They're just in the chat, Ella, so I can see.
Thank you.
Can you see those? So it's likely at the moment is 86%, and certain
lovely,
is
yeah.
13, and we've got 70 responses.
Oh,
it's
brilliant.
still going up.
Lovely. It's really, yeah, positive to see that majority are feeling quite likely about that, and that these would be useful. And perhaps the minority that are kind of uncertain about it, maybe we'll kind of in the latter part of the presentation change your minds on that.
You can see that this is exactly what we heard in terms of I guess the importance of this work with young people, but I guess the need for accessible resources to enable this to happen. So that was our next challenge in terms of how the project, sort of our next phase. So to do this, we needed to build a set of actionable resources for carers and young people to use in their setting. So what we did was we facilitated a co-design phase. So in this process, we had 3 full-day co-design workshops, which was facilitated by an external design team called NEC Digital Studios. And participants consisted of around 10 care experienced young people and another 10 participants, which ranged from residential carers, kinship carers, foster carers, and also some social care professionals in there. But as I said, that consisted of 3 co-design workshops over around about 3-month period. So I'm just going to go on to some images from those workshops just to kind of talk through what those different workshops kind of consisted. So in workshop 1, which is the top 2 left images on that slide, it was a really good opportunity for us to get to know them and everyone to get to know each other in the room, but also to inform the participants exactly what kind of is this everyday life story work, and familiarize what we've done so far, but sort of validate those practice principles that we mentioned earlier in terms of the person-centered and flexible, starting in the present, etc., etc. So as you can see, we sort of had various different activities in terms of prioritizing these principles, in terms of what they thought was the most important in this practice, and again trying to get everybody to engage with what this means. So what I mean by that is we had an activity which really try to focus everybody in the present. So we kind of asked them, in say 30 years time, what would you want, sort of like a time capsule, to tell you about this present day? So we had lots of scraps of paper, lots of different images that people sort of engaged with in terms of what they thought this pack would look like, if that makes sense. So following on from that, we had workshop 2, which was quite soon afterwards. That was in London, and that was a good time to then get everybody in mixed groups. So that was with everyone I mentioned previously, the young people, the carers, the social workers, to kind of unpack what they'd want to see in this resource. So in the bottom left image on the slide, we gave everybody sort of a blank box. Again, lots of scraps of paper, pens, pencils, you name it. Very arts and crafty kind of session. And we just kind of wanted to engage with what they wanted in this box or in this resource. So I think it's quite small. So in one of the boxes, it's kind of flags about a QR code, and someone mentioned how they'd want this QR code to maybe lead to an instructional video about how to use this resource, or what it is, or what the function of it is. And there's lots of other examples I can go into, but it was a really nice activity where each group, we asked a couple of members to present to the wider sort of audience, to all of us, all of the participants at the workshop, again, to unpack what their ideas were, or what they'd like to see in the resource. So it was kind of a Dragon's Den-esque activity where we pretended to like write checks and for whose we thought was the best idea and things like that. So it was quite good for everybody to get involved in. So the final co-design workshop was in Norwich, and that, if you look at the top right image, it says about your Limitless pack is here. Now, that workshop was a little bit later than the first 2 workshops, and the reason for that is so it gave the design team an opportunity to go away and really unpack what kind of data we kind of collected from those first 2 workshops, and in terms of what was needed in this box and the language used, etc., etc. So this created an opportunity for them to build our first prototype of the resource. So and in this final workshop, the main function of that day was to, I guess, kind of get participants to look through the resource and kind of evaluate the wording or the activities that were in there. And again, I guess for us to take on that feedback, so then we can build our sort of Spark resource, which I'll go on to in a moment. So this next slide here just talks about what I guess what we've got as a result of these 3 co-design workshops. So following on from those workshops, we now have our Spark resource. So I'm just going to play this video for you to sort of have a look what's inside. So as you saw there, there's sort of 3 sets of main components, I guess, in the box. So these being the activity cards. So these activity cards are evidence-based on positive psychology literature. So these cards are meant to act as a prompt to action for carers and young people to use as kind of just ideas, really, to create memories and also record memories. So for example, as you saw some examples in that video, there's 3 sets of activity cards in the card deck. So that being activity cards in terms of like going for a picnic, for example, or question cards to ask questions and prompt conversation, and the last one in terms of reflection cards as well. So as I mentioned before, these cards are meant to act as prompts to action to create memories and record memories. So I just want to flag quickly the call card, which again I did mention in that video, but this is the only card we're being a little bit more prescriptive on in terms of we'd like a carer to sort of action this on a regular basis. So the call card suggests to carers to record or write a little story or whatever form that may take. It may be a video, writing, etc., etc. So of their young person sort of on a weekly basis, of those sort of everyday positive moments. So in terms of the other activity cards, we kind of would like carers and young people to use this kind of in a flexible fashion in terms of what interests them in the moment, you know, not being too prescriptive. But as I said, that core card is one we're being a little bit more prescriptive on. So now we have our resource. Sorry, I've skipped too far, but in terms of now we've got our resource, we needed to, I guess, pilot this in terms of, does this work in real life settings with a number of carers? So over the past four months, we've given the Spark resource to a number of carers over a 4-month period, again, to try out this resource with their young person. So in terms of data we're collecting, we're meeting with these carers once a month with other carers or on their own if that sort of works better for them. Again, to just check in every 4 weeks how this is going with their young person, and I guess feeding back what works, what doesn't work, or even seeking advice from other carers in terms of how they're using this and thinking about, you know, applying it with their young person and making it flexible, etc. So other forms of data we are collecting is just a survey where we're just kind of curious to see what cards are being used and how regularly they're being used, and also a reflective log. So that reflective log just looks like a Word document, and we just asked carers to I guess fill in, like, in the moment kind of reflections or any challenges, and also make a note of what cards they've used in that time as well.
The aim of this resource is to support carers to move away from kind of good intentions to good practice by giving them the Spark resources that are based on evidence-based practices. So what we've been kind of finding is there's been a lot of variability in how the resources have been used during this pilot stage of the resources. So, and that isn't surprising because you know, as we remember back to what we consider good, high quality, low intensity life story work, is it should be flexible and person centered to suit individual needs, and that is what we've been seeing. So some families have been embedding these practices into their kind of normal routines. So they've been having regular games nights. It's been becoming part of their kind of weekly routine where the whole family's getting involved, whereas other families have really valued having the young person and the carer having that that space to have that one-to-one time together that the Spark resources allows, especially kind of in busy households where there's lots going on, and some young people have really valued that, whereas other young people have preferred it to be kind of a family activity where it's kind of what all the family members are doing. I think one carer said kind of, this is what we do here, so it's just part of their kind of normal routine. We've seen fluid participation choices. So some young people have been really actively involved in choosing which cards they want to complete and recording their memories, whereas other young people have not wanted to be directly involved. So the care has been kind of facilitating the activities and recording the memories in those instances. We've also kind of found that in those instances when the young person hasn't wanted to maybe be kind of actively involved so much, what carers have found really useful to do is kind of have some of these cards in their head, and perhaps kind of in a card journey they'll maybe ask kind of one of the question cards and kind of weave it into their kind of natural interactions that they're having with their young person. And I think carers have kind of reported back to us that they found this kind of a useful approach to take, because it's kind of fostered that kind of more authentic interactions rather than feeling like something's maybe been like an artificial situation that's been set up. So yeah, it's been quite a lot of variability, which has been nice to see. So we can just share now some of the direct quotes from our foster carers, and we've got one kinship foster carer in our sample. So here you can see talking about that core card activity, so the writing of the weekly story about the young person. They found that it's kind of helped them be a bit more reflective about how they might do that and what they're recording for their young person. And we've got our next one from Edith, and she's kind of saying that some of these activities naturally integrate into what they're doing already anyway, and what they've found is actually these maybe prompt them to kind of think a bit more about what pictures they're taking that their young person enjoys looking at and sharing with them. So yeah, we've really found that kind of families are engaging in these in different ways. And then we've got Grace here, who she's had a bit of a pushback from her young person at times, not always wanted to engage. So we've seen some carers being quite creative about how they might get the young person to engage in these activities. And in this example, she kind of created a game that the whole family can get involved in. And she's kind of role modeling there the types of things that her young person might want to put in that gratitude tin that she's made there.
Yes, thank you. Again, just some further kind of feedback we've had so far. This quite kind of talks about, I guess, the normalization of using the cards within the household. So again, for example, this carer sort of left the cards out on the coffee table and sort of been a bit selective in kind of what one's been on display, just for her the young people in the house to sort of have a think about in passing. So again, another piece of feedback as well. I think it's been quite nice to hear from carers about how this has made them think differently about what to record and I guess how to record those things. So for example, just here an example about playing Uno amongst the family being something she now kind of values as something to record. Again, just a little bit of feedback from our residential cohort. So we've recently recruited some residential workers to try out the resource over a 2-month period. So this is kind of their first impressions of the resource. So again, just some evidence here, just in terms of what they thought. And there's a little bit here about one of the carers talking about how this might be beneficial for a new member of staff looking to build a rapport with a young person. It's good to, I guess, provide ideas for what to do with that young person as well. And again, the second quote here is quite nice in terms of the young person might not necessarily be interested in this stuff, but it doesn't kind of stop the carer kind of having these kind of ideas in mind to use with the young person. So yeah, I think it's back to you, Ella.
Thank you. So far we've only had one of our, oh sorry, I've gone past. One of our residential workers has completed the first month trying out the resources. So that's why we've just got Emma here, who's we've been able to use quotes from, but she's been really enthusiastic about the resources and really positive about how they're working for her and her young person that she's using them with. So here we can see the young person, the cards have helped the young person to stay engaged with an activity and help them to follow what they should be doing, which is usually quite challenging for this particular young person. And they've found that the cards have really supported their engagement with the activities they're doing. She also thinks that the cards could be useful for other workers within the home, as they can act as a prompt to remind workers to record the work that they're doing with young people to help capture those everyday memories. And she also here mentions about the resources being useful to support them to showcase the work that they're doing to Ofsted. So here we can kind of see the different motivation perhaps behind why workers in a residential placement setting might be engaging in these activities compared to foster carers. Simon, should I pass back over to you?
So yeah, the activity is going to be an interactive activity. So what we really want you to be doing is, again, as we've done before, thinking about what we've been talking about today and really coming back to sharing your views and your experiences in relation to what we've been talking about. So what we'd really like you to do is to, on the screen, there'll be a poll, and the poll will ask you about how you feel it will be useful or impactful in your practice to potentially be able to use these resources. There we go. Lovely. So I'd like you now, if you can, to elicit a poll response. So how impactful could these resources be in your work, please? So I'm just going to sort of wait for people to come through. So again, while you're doing this, I think it's important to kind of, I guess, lay out the idea. It feels like it's taken a long time to get to this point, but the idea is that there are lots of kind of resources out there potentially available already. But the evidence base around how impactful those things are isn't negligible. In fact, it's weak, it's poor. And that doesn't mean we don't think these things work. It doesn't mean we don't think some carers are doing these things already. What we do know is that it's not being done consistently to high quality, and it's certainly not accessible for every young person, every teen with care experience. And that's why we've tried to make our resource based on our findings flexible across a range of different kind of home settings, so residential, kinship, foster, and foster care, but also giving, as Ella said, that kind of the choice of the teen to engage or to not engage. It's entirely up to them. And this has all been leading towards, I guess, our next piece of work, where we're trying to really provide the evidence base to move this sort of practice from desirable to essential. So lovely. So yes, some sort of maybe make some impact. Lovely. Okay. So we've done a chunk of work now, which is coming to an end, and we're going to take the learning from those people who've done this, use these resources in the real world, and again, re-engage with our co-design group of carers, care experienced teens, and social care professionals to kind of develop the next iteration of our resources. Now, the resources are far from being a silver bullet or a magic potion or a magic wand, for example. What they are is providing the best evidence available prompts to action we can, and training and support for carers. So we're going to build these experiences together and develop to the next iteration, the kind of beta or second version of our kit, if you like. Now, having done that, we're then looking to do something called a feasibility trial and a process evaluation. So just very briefly, a feasibility trial or a study is a study that involves a detailed analysis that considers all the critical aspects of the proposed project in order to ensure the likelihood of it may succeed. And what that means is that to move the needle from desirable practice to essential, we have to create evidence that sort of indicates that this work is impactful in terms of children and young people's well-being, potentially carers' well-being, and also that it makes a fundamental change or improvement. Now, to do that, we have to, I can't just go out and go and get some money from the government. I need to show them that this sort of thing is feasible. And this is where this next part of our research comes in, which we'll be talking about a little bit. So we're looking to work with 4 to 6 local authorities and recruit around 80 carers. So again, roughly sort of 15 to carers to per local authority, something along those lines. My quick maths isn't great. But we've got 6 months to kind of work with local authorities to recruit these carers in. The carers will be involved in our study for a 6 months period after that. So there'll be 2 groups. It's called being randomized, and one group of carers will get the resources and one group won't. So again, if you imagine kind of having a test group, if you like, here, and making sure there's no kind of placebo effects, and making sure that actually these things aren't just by chance, we have to have that comparator. So this is going to work, as I said, over kind of a 12-month period or 13-month period in total, but we'll have a 6-month window to try and get people interested in what we're doing. And the idea from that will be to make sure that we can look at the following things that are really important to us. So actually, is using these set of resources, are they impacting well-being? Are they impacting the closeness of the relationships between the care and the young person? And are they also influencing the ability to enjoy positive moments, both again from the carer looking at that, but also for the teen themselves as well. And we're also been looking at what works well and what didn't in relation to our the kind of, I guess, the research infrastructure or the research project that sits around this, and making sure that we're doing things in a way which isn't going to overly burden some people. So again, I think for me, that's the really kind of important bit here, because we have to make sure that we're doing this in a way which isn't overly burdensome, and that together these data will allow us to inform whether a larger scale study, which will finally create a solid evidence base whether this thing is worthwhile in terms of children, young people and carers outcomes or not.